All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our inaugural session of CineSparks. Just a quick introduction for you. My name's Brian Claypool from Christie Digital Systems. I'll be your moderator for this first session of our CineSparks webinar series. We created this for emerging filmmakers, screenwriters, cinematographers, engineers, technologists, anybody that is relatively new to cinema and production and associated workflows to motion pictures. Our goal is to update you on industry trends, round out some knowledge, and hopefully set the stage for what the future of the industry will look like as you continue to add your talent and your skill set into the pool for the future of cinema filmmaking. We wish you a great big welcome. But before we jump into everything, just a few things to consider here about the webinar. It is being recorded, so if there are nuggets of wisdom that are given or special highlights that you want to share with others, there will be recordings of this made available. Please use the chat area to be able to talk amongst yourselves, ask questions, and of course, we'll be able to get to some of those questions at the end of the session. So we'll try to leave enough time here to be able to get to some of those questions from the audience, of course. Now, if you enjoy this session, you find it meaningful and helpful to you, feel free to shout about it, spread the joy, as it were. You can spread it around using at Christie Digital or hashtag CineSparks on social media. And before I introduce our very, very special guest, just a brief intro about myself and why I'm moderating today. Like many that you'll find in this industry, it's a bit of a sickness. Once you get infected with this cinema virus, there is no cure. You're probably going to be in it forever. But for myself, I remember sitting in the theater when I was a kid. My favorite movie was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it just kind of swept me into another place, as good motion pictures tend to do with people. And over a long period of time, I realized that this is something I wanted to do, but I've been bit by that bug at a relatively young age. And I encourage everyone to share your favorite feature film, or other special circumstances that might have brought you into the industry in the chats as well. Now, I'm excited to host this webinar today. I've been doing this for about 35 years. Christie has been in cinema for about 65 years, and lots of changes have been made into fruition over that long period of time. First, from carbon arc illumination to xenon illumination, film to digital, and now the latest trend is being able to replace lamp technology with solid-state laser-based illumination. We're very proud of that heritage and the innovation that it brings. But it's important that we share our knowledge, our expertise, and one of the big reasons why we created this Christie Ignite program to be able to nurture this next generation of professionals, and CineSparks is part of that activity. We collaborate with partners and other industry experts on lots of topics to try to bring more valuable information to you in this webinar. And maybe, who knows, there might be some special secrets that they'll divulge to you in the course of this webinar as well. So the first partner to be able to join us for this special series is Geoff Burdick from Lightstorm Entertainment. Christie and Lightstorm have been collaborating together for many, many years, and Geoff has been an important and vital element of that collaboration throughout the entire journey. So I'm pleased to introduce Geoff Burdick, Senior Vice President, Production Services and Technology at Lightstorm Entertainment, who will give us some ideas about trends and models for consuming content that are impacting himself and other creatives, as well as to share some different approaches to working in the industry. So, Geoff, thanks for joining us. And I know you're really busy with some new film that you're probably working on that has some association with some past films. So congratulations. And I know you're taking a lot of time away from Fire and Ash to be able to join us for this. And we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us.
Oh, happy to be here, and thanks everybody who's participating. I know it's early morning if you're on the West Coast, so much appreciated.
Now, I remember, I don't know if it was the first time I met you, Geoff, but I remember when you guys were in Santa Monica, Jim called a meeting of a bunch of different technologists around the region. And he was a little bit cagey about this project that he was working on, but it soon became clear what he was talking about was Avatar. But we were talking about 3D and rendering technology and playback capabilities and all these different aspects of digital cinema that at the time were still this is pre-DCI spec, right? So we're trying to get an idea of Okay, well, what level of resolution and detail and color and bit depth, all these scientific terms that we use in our part of the industry. I think that was the first time that I met you, was in that session that he had in Santa Monica. Does that sound about right, where we started from?
I think it was, and it was an interesting meeting. I mean, back in the day, Avatar was certainly not the first 3D feature film to be released, but it was one of the first, and it was certainly one that had a lot of resources thrown at it. And so we were, in early days, a little bit anxious, just regarding whether or not we were going to be able to pull it off. And so we tried to do something that was a little bit iffy at the time, which was to get all of the technologists from competing companies into the same room. So we had the technology folks from every major studio, technology folks from the OEMs in terms of exhibition, like Christie, people who were in early stages of creating, some of the more forward-thinking digital cinema servers, everyone who we could possibly think of, and kind of floated the idea that if we didn't ask you anything proprietary, would you be willing to all sit in the same room together and talk about this? And almost everyone, well, eventually everyone said yes. We did have one last minute cancellation the night before. I'm not going to say who, but it was a big participant. And that one did take a little bit of kind of last minute coaxing for them to come to the table, but they did. And I think at the end of the day, it was a great discussion. I mean, not only did it benefit us, not even so much technically, but just in terms of putting our minds at ease that we'd be able to achieve what we were talking about. But I think that, rising tide raises all ships, right? And so I think it was good for everybody just to be able to sit in the same room and talk about this stuff in a casual but meaningful way.
Casual, non-confrontational, and just trying to bring the industry together and be able to solve problems, to be able to create a better experience and allow the audiences to, at the end, really enjoy Jim's vision on these films. Do you feel that right now that's still a big part of what you do on a day-to-day basis, is trying to bring all the different technologies, possibilities together? How does that work for you today versus the way it was? I guess that was 20 years ago now, that when we had those sessions.
Yeah, no, I mean, excuse me. Back before the advent of digital cinema, and I don't know how many of you were really participating in this kind of technology back then, was obviously a completely different industry in a lot of ways, not just in terms of acquisition and exhibition, being just analog 35 millimeter, with some audio digital goodness starting to creep its way in. But everything was a little bit more practical and hands-on and real time. I mean, it sounds like a million years ago, and it was, but there just wasn't a lot of new technology being pushed back in the 90s. Now, obviously, it's a different time, and even when I was fortunate enough to meet Brian Claypool and begin our relationship with Christie Digital, we're in a way, it's funny. We being Lightstorm are one guy at the end of the day, and some folks may scoff and say, "Yep, but we make big movies and they're big budgets and all of that good stuff." Excuse me. But again, we're not a studio. We're not a conglomerate. We're one guy making the movies that he writes and produces and directs and co-edits, the movies that he wants to make. So as soon as we started getting into the territory of new tech, the idea of kind of getting out there and pushing and pleading and coaxing and convincing and just trying to be foundationally involved in how all of these things work, not just for us, but for everyone, became a big part of the gig. And again, I mean, from our perspective, you don't have to do movies at high frame rates. You don't have to make movies in 3D, etc. But it's more just the concept of trying to push the envelope so that all of these new technologies, all of these tool sets are available to content creators over the years, and just trying to help enable people to make the kinds of media that they want to make at the end of the day.
I appreciate that, Geoff. And it does take a singular vision to be able to push that envelope sometimes, is the way that few people can. I mean, as you know, I worked at Lucasfilm back in the day, and it was the same thing. There was a singular vision from George, who wanted to try different things in a different way. And that is what sets the stage for a lot of innovation for others to take advantage of. Now, you have a few movies that you've got to finish here over the next few years. Can you shed any light on what challenges that you may have for The Way of Water that you're trying to learn from to be able to apply toward either a smoother production workflow or a smoother experience trying to be able to bring Jim's vision into reality? Are there certain areas of the production or post-production pipeline that you're working on honing better processes or better technologies to be able to make realizing those visions easier or cheaper or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we shot, and by shot, I mean all of our performance capture. And after a couple of years of performance capture, a couple of years worth of just live action acquisition, we did Avatar 2, The Way of Water, and Avatar 3, Fire and Ash back to back. So a lot of the vast majority of all of that kind of acquisition and editorial, all of those backbones, all of those pipelines that we created and installed for Avatar, The Way of Water, luckily for us, kind of already exist for Avatar, Fire and Ash. Part of what we're trying to do, and it's a little, we're a little bit of a pain in the what, and at least arguably for good reason. And by that I mean, the vast majority of content creators, especially when it comes to things like 3D, they'll create a 2D version of their movie, and they'll create a 3D version of their movie. And there are a couple of other filmmakers who, depending on the day or the year, embrace things like high frame rates, right? When you mix all of those together, you start to come up with multiple masters and multiple versions that you want out in the field. Beyond that, though, we tend to try and optimize the experience for our customers. And by ours, I don't mean Lightstorm's, I just mean the industry's customers, people who go to the movies in theaters the way that folks used to. And we do a variety of masters. So we do 2D and 3D. When it comes to 3D, I think we are one of the few, or maybe the only, content creators that don't create one master. We create a 3.5 foot Lambert version, a 6 foot Lambert version, 9 foot Lamberts, 14 foot Lamberts, 31.5 foot Lamberts, yada, yada, yada. We create all of them. We create all of them in standard frame rates, 24 frames per second, and high frame rate, 48 frames per second. We do it in different dynamic ranges. We do all of those then in different aspect ratios. So we'll do 239:1 and 185:1. On the first Avatar, we also did a kind of full frame 178:1. We had 3 different aspect ratios, and each one of those takes so much time. Literally every single shot is framed, and composed differently in terms of creating our master. And then obviously we do all of the different sound formats and audio goodness that we get into. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think we set a record back on the first Avatar for the number of masters released into the field, and then we blew way past that on Avatar: The Way of Water. So we may try a couple of other things on Avatar, Fire and Ash, but largely that foundation already exists. After Avatar, Fire and Ash comes out, and we start to look at the possibilities of Avatar 4 and 5, that's a whole other order of magnitude that I can't go into today. But yeah, some fun things planned.
Well, we can't wait for the time when you can get to go forward with 4 and 5. I mean, it's been an incredible, impactful, epic release of motion pictures to us. And again, Jim has brought forward so many incredible experiences to so many people in theaters around the world. He's critical for the industry and the success of the industry. Would you say that the versioning activity adds a tremendous burden on the post-production schedule in terms of trying to create everything at the last minute, or are you actually given enough time to be able to deal with all these versionings, or does it feel like a little bit of a mad dash to the finish line?
Nobody gives or takes away time other than ourselves. So we have no one to blame, but as is often the case, trying to create any movie, any piece of content, you're up against a lot of different deadlines, and you're working with, I wouldn't say, working against, but you're working with a lot of different pieces of that puzzle that maybe feel like they're kind of, pushing your back up against the wall. But at the end of the day, it's all there towards the greater success of your content. And by success, I don't mean financial success. I mean, we're very lucky and very blessed to have had the Avatar movies, be very well received at the end of the day. By success, I just mean Jim being able to create the movie that he wants to create. But yeah, it's an absolute edict for us that we do create all of these different masters. It is a huge draw on time and energy and resources, especially at the end of the day. We support 3D, in a limitless capacity, which is to say, you can't overestimate our dedication to 3D. Part of that ends up being, talking about last minute. There's something that that we do that really I don't think anyone else does, and it comes down to, I think, one of the comments, somebody I think commented that there were maybe in excess of 1,000 different formats sent out worldwide for Avatar: The Way of Water. Joey Peacock, and Joey, you're right. There were thousands of different versions, and the reason you get into those kinds of numbers is that you get into what's called localization, right, for the worldwide audience. And so, some of those are dubbed versions of all of those different iterations and versions that I talked about before. Some of those are subtitled. The subtitled versions are interesting because we're so dedicated to the 3D experience being a good one that we actually personally get into the placement of every single subtitle. So I don't mean the English language Navi, that's the native language of the indigenous people in our movies. And we create English language subtitles when they're speaking their native language. I mean, in terms of placement, so not just in depth on the Z-axis, but where they sit on the X-axis and Y-axis, where they sit across the screen and how high on the screen. We get in there and we place a reference master for where every single word, every single line of dialogue sits. And that becomes the reference for all of the other hundreds of languages in all of those other frame rates and light levels and formats and aspect ratios that I talked about before. There are a lot of different rules about, how long those subtitles should appear based on different, well, I guess what I'm saying is that there are different rules in terms of how long those subtitles appear, and not just how long they appear, but the way that they sit, meaning, do you want your line of dialogue to read just straightforward from left to right, or do you want it broken down into 2 lines? And at what word do you want it broken down? Some of those things are recommended, but we try to get into the intricacies, with help of many of those languages, so that we can try and create a reference master that's going to be as accommodating as possible for everybody, and have them be actively moving across screen left to right or in depth. We do that, yeah, kind of at the 11th hour or past the 11th hour sometimes. Again, just as part and parcel of trying to make sure that everybody has the best experience.
It's that attention to detail that makes the difference between having a good experience and having a great, outstanding experience that will be part of your memory for a very long period of time. And we appreciate all the detail that you and the team put in to being able to realize Jim's vision. What recommendations would you have, Geoff, for people that are just starting out into this industry? What special skills or talents or mindset should people that are new to this industry keep in mind as they get into their careers in production or post-production?
I guess in very general terms, if I were to make any recommendations, one might be to not pigeonhole yourselves too much. I think it's great for everyone to have, kind of their jam and what they love, and what they, if you're lucky enough to know what you want to focus on, and you want to dedicate all of your energy to. I think that's fantastic. I would just, try to keep your mind open at the same time, right? Because it may not be exactly where you want to focus 20 years from now, or 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now. So the more that you can learn about all of these different areas of, we used to call it movie making or filmmaking. Now it's just media. I mean, the whole model has changed in every way, right? So think about what goes into all of these different pieces of content, not just in terms of acquisition, but in terms of the pipelines that exist to manage all of this content, to optimize it, to process it, to master it, and then to distribute it. Think about, consumption and just, the way that content is consumed down the road. There are 1,000 ways that all of you folks can participate in all of this happening. And so, yeah, again, I think it's great to know what you love and what you want to do, but I would recommend trying to learn about as much as you possibly can. Keep your options open. You might discover something, 2 years from now that's 180 degrees from what you thought you wanted to focus on, that you love even more. So yeah, don't close doors, I would say, just because you don't think it's where you want to focus. And maybe along those same lines, I would just say, in terms of everything now, so many models that existed decades ago, or maybe even just a few years ago, those models don't really apply anymore. So I would say think outside of the box, and just because you might have an approach to something that's new and different, doesn't mean that it isn't valid and isn't viable. And think about ways in which you can utilize it and capitalize on it to try and, keep your visions in play and keep yourself moving towards your goals.
That's great advice, Geoff. Some of the best ideas are the ones that truly come from an out of the box perspective. So it's good advice, being able to keep yourself open to other perspectives that can help solve problems that maybe are not in your wheelhouse, but your perspective allows you to see the light of a problem in a different way, and being able to maneuver yourself in a way where you can help address those problems and improve the environment for the good of the work being done. That is great advice. I am kind of curious, Geoff, because I remember another moment in my own career where there was some little film about a boat that sank a few years ago that was pretty good. And I remember going to my local theater in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I'm originally from. And it was the first time I ever saw a film in SDDS sound, so digital sound. And the movie was pretty good. It was okay. Yeah. But it was the first time I ever heard a movie the way I heard that little movie about a boat. And I think you were involved with Lightstorm in those days as well. Is that correct?
I was, yeah.
I'm curious. Can you give everybody an idea of how much that movie pushed the envelope for filmmaking and storytelling and the production technologies that had to be developed in the course of that little tiny film?
Yeah, I mean, look at it, and obviously, Titanic, much like Avatar, notwithstanding the fact that these are big movies, definitely kind of felt like the underdog in a lot of ways, meaning everyone in the industry foretold great doom, right? That it was never going to succeed. You know how the movie ends. Who's going to want to watch a movie, let alone a long movie, when you know how the movie ends? Obviously, lots of parallels between the hubris of the people who created this unsinkable ship, and then these other people who are going to make this giant movie where everyone knows what's going to happen ahead of time, and nobody's going to want to see it, and it's going to be a huge failure. Again, it's something that Jim always loved. It's a story that he always wanted to tell. The script was great, so it just became kind of a question of trying to figure out how to make it. Jim had recently created his own visual effects company called Digital Domain back in the day, along with two other partners. And so, there was a lot of what at the time was groundbreaking digital work that was going to be done, but so much of that movie was made in kind of old school traditional ways. So, huge physical models, things that we would never make these days. It would all be done digitally. It would be easier. It would be more cost effective, blah, blah, blah. All of those were physical models that were made at the time. Painstaking detail, shot in traditional ways on 35 millimeter film, using a lot of different cool methodologies that unfortunately, have been lost. They just don't exist anymore because nobody shoots that way anymore. But even something as simple as, trying to figure out where we were going to shoot became this huge endeavor and business in and of itself. Because we were, in addition to all of these miniatures of various scales, depending on how you were going to shoot them, we were creating at least one side, the starboard side of the Titanic itself. Or was it port? Yeah, Titanic side. But we had to figure out where we could do that and where it made sense to do it, and where we could do it such that we could get the, kind of the shots and the angles that Jim wanted with the actual ocean behind it without actually shooting in the ocean. So it was a question of first going around the world and figuring out if there was an existing studio or facility that would support what we needed to do. There was not. So then the goal shifted to figuring out where in the world we could build a studio that would enable the shots that he needed. And I can remember, when we ended up in Rosarito Beach, Mexico, and it was still just a cliff. And I drove out there a couple days ahead of time with my, ragtag team and a couple of trucks. And we set up these huge miniatures and tiny little analog cameras that would kind of replicate with their tiny lenses, the 35 millimeter lenses that Jim would use when he was actually shooting, and figured out, okay, if we set the miniature here with these kinds of lenses, now we're accurately replicating where the almost full scale Titanic would sit and where it could exist, assuming that we blow up this cliff and create this facility and build the largest tank in the world to house it, all of that good stuff. And it was great. I mean, obviously, a lot of engineers, a lot of very, very smart folks trying to figure things out. For months, we had, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know, but we had little towers up on the cliff. Even once we decided this is it. This is the only place in the world where we can shoot this movie. That meant that all of the real work by the smart folks began. So they started getting into the structural integrity of the cliff. And if we blow out this portion to create this giant tank, will it be safe? These towers were built all along the cliff with kind of the wind instruments so that it could measure the wind over the course of several months and figure out if the wind would ever get so, destructive that it would actually cause damage. All of these environmental tests and issues then continued forever. And it was all finally, kind of greenlit. And we built the facility, built the tanks, and shot the movie there. So yeah,
It's amazing. All the different skills, all the different disciplines, all the different levels of talent that have to be brought together to be able to bring these incredible visions to fruition. It is staggering when you go through the process and describe it the way that you do. And again, it's a fantastic industry in that regard. It's not just editors and colorists and cameramen and grips, but it's engineers, it's construction, it's materials, it's supply chain, it's an incredible experience. That's one of the reasons why I wanted you to kind of go through that story for us, is to make the point that it's not just being an actor. There's a lot more to it, and it brings in a ton of other disciplines and a ton of other talent. I'm curious, Geoff, what do you think about the use of AI and other machine learning capabilities into the future of filmmaking? That perspective of Titanic, where so much of it was done in miniature and analog. Do you see the implementation of AI and digital rendering being able to meet the level of detail and the scope of what you're able to achieve on Titanic in a more cheaper, better, cost-effective? Is that going to play a role moving forward, the use of AI and other technologies into the filmmaking sphere that you're currently working on?
I feel like it will eventually, right? And I'm sure I don't have to tell you folks, there's a lot of hoopla in our industry and other industries right now. A lot of people are excited about the opportunities, creative and logistic, that AI may bring to the table. A lot of folks are unhappy about it. And then a lot of folks, and I think that this is maybe where we sit, we're excited about it. We just want to make sure that, it's not abused, that it's developed as a tool that content creators can use like every other tool, in a way that is respectful always of the person who's driving it at the end of the day, because people are going to be driving it. People are going to be using it to do things. It's not just going to do things automatically, right? But to use a bad pun, like that Pandora's box, that's opened. It's out there. People are using it. People are doing things. So I don't think there's any scenario in which that's all stuffed back into the box and we close the lid and lock it up. It's out there, and I think it's just, again, a matter of managing it in a way that makes sense. Early versions of, not necessarily AI, not kind of machine learning or generative AI, but different versions of that technology have been around and in use for years and years and years. And I can remember scenarios in which even those early versions were kind of poo-pooed as not necessarily something that didn't add value, but that might not be right, and might not be somehow appropriate to use. And I just throwing it out there, way back when, if you think about, if you watch any old movies on Netflix or whatever, and you'll see, hairs on the screen because there was a hair in the gate when the movie was shot, or when the negative was processed, there was hair or dirt in the machinery. And early on, in fact, it was on Titanic, when we were mastering Titanic for home entertainment, we started using some new technology that could go in and clean that stuff up. And it was groundbreaking at the time. It didn't identify the problem for us. We had to identify the problem, but we would kind of go through with early tools and a mouse and kind of outline a piece of dirt or a hair. And then these algorithms and these programs, this software would kind of sample from some surrounding areas. They would sample the same areas from prior frame or following frame. And it wouldn't always work, but sometimes it would work. And a piece of dirt that had been exposed on the negative or a hair that was in the gate would get cleaned up. And, you know, we thought it was just the coolest thing since sliced bread, and resulted in a beautiful picture. And there were people that lost their minds at the time, saying, no, that's not right. If there was a hair in the gate, then everybody in the world needs to see that hair in the gate when they watch the movie. If there was a piece of dirt on the negative, everyone in the world needs to see that piece of dirt. So it's tough. It's subjective. I mean, you can't please everyone at the end of the day. All you can do is, make the media that you want to make.
I'm curious, Geoff, do you have a particular point in the process that is, and you can't say it's at the end when you're seeing the first cut and a final version for the first time. Do you have a favorite part in the entire process that brings a specific amount of relief or joy to you in the experience of the technology and the post-production process?
When you're done.
I said you can't say that. You can't say when you're done.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it. Because prior to that, so much of what we do is, again, to use just an old-fashioned analogy, it's smoke and mirrors. And even when, we're shooting performance capture, obviously, I mean, it's not animation. It's the actors, and they're in perf cap suits, and they're wearing their headgear and all of that good stuff. They're not doing it against green screens. They're not doing it with props. They're just on an empty sound stage underneath a performance capture volume, and Jim is directing them. Mm-hmm. And when Jim's doing it, he's looking at, he's using a virtual camera, looking at a virtual monitor, and he's seeing very, very rough, real-time renditions of the Na'vi in their environments, live, real time as he's shooting it, but not in a formative way, nothing that represents the final movie. And then, we start looking at that content, and we start thinking about the way it should look in 3D stereoscopically. And so we start creating stereo versions, but the texture isn't there, and the lighting isn't there, and the details aren't there, and a lot of elements of the shot itself aren't there. So then we start working on newer versions. And in the meantime, we're shooting, mass quantities of live action, but some of that live action is blue screen or green screen, or, we use simulcam, which is some of the technology that we developed to try and get the timing and the accuracy and the interactions right between the virtual characters and environments and the live action characters and environments. It's all piecemeal, I guess, for us, right? Because of the nature of the movies that we make. I mean, I'm a huge fan of quiet, little intimate dramas. Mm-hmm. It's not really what we make. We make kind of these big sci-fi epics, and so sometimes it isn't until the end of the process when we're seeing, oh, here's this shot and this comp, and it's fully rendered and it's fully cleaned and it's at the right frame rate, and we're grading it in the right environment, for premium experiences, and seeing what it can look like and hearing what it's going to sound like, because where we kind of post, we do all of our picture adjacent to where we're doing our sound. And so when all of that starts to come together, that's it for me. I mean, I wouldn't say, I mean, I drag my family and friends to our movies, of course, but I would say, before that, when we're just in those final stages and we're finally getting to see what for us is literally years and years worth of work coming together, we'll see it piecemeal. We'll see finished final shots on their own, and we'll hear mixing for different sequences. but finally getting to see all of it just cohesively sitting there as one story, yeah, that's the best part.
No, as some people may know, that my first love is audio. So I'm just kind of curious, when you do go into final mix, um, and it takes a process, of course, but are they updating final video as you're doing the final mix? Like so you're working with one cut and they're doing the mix, or they're not updating shots every other day as they get things rendered, or you're working with final picture and final mix?
No, typically, at least for us, when the folks are mixing, the cut itself hasn't changed, but they're just mixing to a 2D kind of work picture that is some representation of what was available when the process started. And the process, our mixing it takes months. It takes a long time to get it right. And vice versa. I mean, obviously, when we're working on picture, we're either doing it with no audio whatsoever, or we're doing it with early temp track, whatever's sitting in the Avid, just something that we have. And sometimes we'll need that audio just to make sure that we're, that we're racking focus from one character to another correctly, because their head is turned and we don't know exactly when they're saying that word or that phrase. And so we need something there to make sure that it's accurate. And there might be some, kind of last minute tweaks that are made because we're tweaking picture in some way, and that's going to reflect back to the mix, or they're shifting, our dialogue editor is shifting something at the last second because it just works better. And then that reflects back to what we do, and we've got to make some last minute adjustments. But in general, yeah, both sides are working with non-final up until the very end.
Do you find any challenges working across international boundaries with international teams, communication issues, or otherwise, or do you make it so that WEDA is kind of the centralized location for all deliverables and everybody's in one location? Do you have any challenges working internationally with different cultures and different people?
Not really. I mean, we are very lucky to have done the first Avatar and the subsequent Avatars in New Zealand. It's a fantastic place to work. It's a fantastic place to, for us to spend years of our lives. And the way it's set up there is really in some ways conducive to the way we work. On the first Avatar, we did all of our live action at Stone Street Studios in Wellington, which is on the North Island of New Zealand. But we really did most of our post back here on what was the 20th Century Fox lot. On Avatar: The Way of Water, we kind of shifted that and we moved everything to New Zealand. But at the same time, it was great because it's so centrally located. So there's actually more than one now, but at the time there was really one. What I'll call studio lot, Stone Street Studios, shockingly enough, located on Stone Street. And that's where we did all of our live action photography. So literally kind of down the street and around the corner is Park Road Post, the only post-production facility in the country. The only, well, I don't want to say real one, the only one that's big enough to handle a project of this scale and scope. But it is huge, and you can do everything there. So they've got mastering rooms. They've got 2 huge mixing rooms, just like the Fox lot had or has, near field rooms. They've got their cinema with Dolby Cinema installed. Everything that we used, whether it was ourselves, a small theater that I built on the Stone Street lot here at Lightstorm, even the smaller rooms where we would work at Park Road Post and their large cinema, all Christie Digital projectors, and the big room has Dolby Cinema, which defaults back to Christie Cinema. it ends up working really well. And literally kind of down that same street and around a corner, maybe a 2-minute walk, is Weta Digital and Weta Workshop. So yeah, hardly a hardship for us to work internationally. I mean, if anything, so just centrally located and just really, really conducive to bouncing back and forth between all of these things happening concurrently over months and years and being able to tackle all of them every day. Yeah, really
good collaboration. Thank you, Geoff. Now we only have about 14 minutes or so left. So last question, and then we want to open the floor for questions from the audience. What advice would you give to today's young professionals on how to network? Where can they go to be able to get more exposure to the industry and are looking to try to find their next path as they navigate their careers? What advice would you give to them to network and grow their connections in the industry?
This is and tell me what you think, Brian, but I mean, this is a horrible statement. Networking is really, really important. And it can be tough, not just logistically, physically, time-wise. It can be tough because everybody's busy, right? Everybody's really busy. Everybody's doing 1,000 things. Everybody's got their family, their friends, their jobs, all of these things going on. But at the end of the day, it's really important just to be involved in everything that everybody's doing because they are so busy, because everybody's so focused, because everybody is so driven. So, I mean, luckily for us and for all of you folks, I mean, so many companies like Christie Digital, like the Academy, like SIMPD, I think even a lot of the studios, they all have kind of outreach groups now that help to get people just kind of amassed and coordinated and try to help people, kind of think about all of this cohesively, put everyone in contact with each other, put people in contact with folks who are hiring or who might be hiring or thinking of hiring down the road. And, what I would say, I used to have a very old-fashioned saying that I would tell myself a million years ago, or early on when I was starting out, which was, don't be pushy, but be persistent.
Be present. Yep.
Yeah, and just keep talking to everyone. And that doesn't mean a one-sided relationship, right? It means let people know what you're doing, let them know what you're interested in, because that's what's going to, kind of inform them down the road when they're thinking about needs that they have and whether or not you might be able to be a part of those needs being serviced, right? So yeah.
Appreciate that. No, it's great advice. And there's a couple of organizations that I can think of. You mentioned SIMPD. There's also the Young Entertainment Professionals part of HPA, which is a good one for people to be involved in. And also, depending upon where you are, there might be localized versions of some of these that can happen. I know that Geoff and I are based in Southern California, but there are other entities that are outside the U.S. and outside of Southern California, and a lot of them are sponsored by academic institutions, colleges, filmmaking courses where there are seminars. It takes a little bit of time to research where all these activities are, but there certainly are a lot of opportunities just to be engaged in the community and see what's going on and insert yourself into those and be an active participant. I think that's the big advice. Don't just be an observer. People do want to hear from others. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to go up and talk to people and find out what they're doing and ask questions, because most people like to be asked questions about what they're doing and how they're doing it. Geoff may not like to hear questions from Brian Claypool, but that doesn't mean that it's still not a valuable character trait to go out and ask questions and find out what's going on. So I'm just going to give an opportunity now for the audience to be able to pose any questions here to the group. I do see one that's come into my chat here. Let's see. This one's for you, Geoff. So, what do you see the impact of other new technologies specifically? One example is AI, but what others do you see as being impactful to the future of the industry?
I think two things. One is that, the theatrical experience. I'm sure everyone you know has kind of read about and heard about. After strikes, after the pandemic, after all of these things, the exhibition community and the theatrical experience continues to work hard to rebound and get back to where it was years ago. So anything that can be done, and this is technically, but it's practically as well. Anything that can be done to make that a great experience, not necessarily technically something you can't get at home, because home entertainment and consumer electronics is a whole other ball of wax. And that was kind of the other thing that I was going to mention. But beyond all of that, just something that makes you want to go out to a movie theater and experience a movie in that environment, whether it's Dolby Cinema, IMAX, whether it's just your neighborhood theater, reasons that you want to get out there and experience it socially and with other people. So anything that helps to make that special and make it something that you want to do is important. And then beyond that, people are going to experience that media outside of the theater in huge, huge numbers, whether that's on a plane, on your phone, if you still buy physical and you go out and invest in 4K UHD discs, head-mounted displays, all of those good things. So all of those are critically important to mass numbers of people being able to be exposed to and enjoy and experience the content that's being created. So everything that helps to push those down the field and make those great experiences, those are important. Yep.
Thank you very much, Geoff. Appreciate that. Another question that has come in from the audience: how much time was allocated to research and testing the effects or animation of Avatar: The Way of Water, and how much of this was in pre-production?
A huge, huge amount. So a lot of I would say, like, some of it is what I'll call virtual, right? Which is basically just whatever you think of in terms of, let's say getting the look of the water to be what Jim wants it to be. Everything from going out and shooting actual water in various places around the world and having a practical reference for it, to if Brian has seen this, but if you ever come out to Lightstorm, we've got a little display area, right? And you think of Avatar: The Way of Water and all of the characters and the Mekaina clan, right? The folks that live kind of in and around the water. So all of their costumes, they exist in real life. They exist physically. And when you see them on the screen, you're seeing them created virtually, right? It's CG, they're digital. But part of the reason, at least we believe, that we've always believed, that they look as good as they do, is that they've gone through, and I'm not exaggerating, months of design. So that's just old school designers working on paper, coming up with different designs for their clothes, for their headdresses, for their jewelry, for their feathers, for their armbands, everything. And that's an iterative process. It goes back and forth unendingly. And then it's finally agreed upon. And not what a digital, but what a workshop will then spend untold periods of time creating those in real life, as if we were actually going to shoot the movie, shoot those characters that only exist in Jim's mind practically. That's done for specific reasons. I mean, I don't want to say it's not fun, but it's not done for fun. It's done so that the virtual artists can see them and hold them and see what they look like at night, see what they look like in different kinds of light, see what they look like when the wind hits the feathers, take some of all of these weavings and we'll record what they look like underwater so that the digital artists can use all of that content and not use it in a way to create what they're doing, but they can reference it when they're creating their CG models. Yeah, so for us, all of that research and development and reference, it's a huge part of the process.
That's amazing insight, Geoff. I live in a little world of pixels and light, and displaying those pixels and light on a flat surface in a movie theater for the majority of the time. But the insights and the detail that you bring to how these visions are created and the workflows that are behind them are really, really special. Appreciate it greatly. It just blows my mind how much effort and work goes into this. When you see the end result, we all take it a bit for granted how much effort goes in behind the scenes to make this happen. A follow-up question here was wondering if new high-end 8K cameras with global shutter offer any new shortcuts for your team.
Shortcuts, no, but for us, I think part of, it's a good question, and I would say it's kind of a funny thing that we talk about a lot, and not just in terms of cameras, but in general, There was a time when the first digital cinema projectors, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Brian, were they 1.3K?
That's right. Yeah, SXGA.
Okay. So they weren't even 2K, and then 2K wasn't great enough, and they had to be 4K. And in terms of cameras, there were some that were close to 4K. I think there were 3.8K, but they weren't really 4K. And then the last cameras we shot with were 6K, but 6K isn't enough, so they've got it now. We got to push to 8K. There's certainly the ideology that the higher the number, the better it's going to be. And in some ways, that's always going to be true. But in some ways, it's also a question of diminishing returns, right? Are you really going to be able to recognize the difference between 8K and 6K by the time you're looking at a DCP, a digital cinema package, being projected in your local theater? I'm not saying you're not, but there are there are trade-offs and there are limitations to bandwidth. So it's not short anymore, but the short answer to your question is, I guess, it's figuring out the best way to utilize those increases and those advances. By that I mean, we may sometimes feel we want that entire 8K sensor for whatever reason, and we want to expose all of it, and we're going to use every pixel that we can. But other times, what if we want to do things that require part of that bandwidth? So we're only going to utilize 6K of that sensor, but we're going to kind of shift the resources or ask the camera manufacturers to shift the resources so that we can use some of that bandwidth to do other things within that camera. So it's all important. Yeah, and it just depends on what your goal creatively is going to be at the end of the day in terms of how you use those advances.
Got it. Well, thank you, Geoff. And from the projection standpoint, we get these questions a lot as well, right? Because there are 8K devices and other things that we get asked sometimes. Do we want to bring that into the forefront of cinema projection technology? And our answer is similar to the way that you proposed it. But I want to recall, I think Jim had one of these questions ages ago, and he put the answer in the context of, remember, we make moving pictures, not still pictures. So there's a difference between spatial resolution and temporal resolution. And it's very hard to count pixels when the images are moving, especially in a big sheet in front of you when you're sitting quite a far way back from the screen. So we do keep an eye on increasing resolution, but there are other aspects of visual image quality that we pay a lot more attention to, frankly, and contrast is one of the big ones. So it's not just about the amount of pixels on the screen, but it's at the quality of the pixels that we try to put onto the screen as well. I think we have one last question, and we're going to have to wrap things up. I would like to know the perspective of remote and collaborative work in today's post-production workflows, and if you have an opinion on the future of this way of working in the industry. It's a great question.
It is a good question, and I think it's important. I know a lot of content creators that utilize it in different ways, and we do too. A lot of people were forced into it again because of COVID. And by that I mean, trying to figure out truly collaborative ways, not of and I don't mean to kind of downplay the importance here, but of sending some dailies to a studio executive so that they can see it, and comment on it on their iPad. That of course that's important, but what happens if you can't have your editorial staff come in, and your entire editorial staff needs to figure out how to not just work from home? They might have a home-based version of the software. How are they going to access your servers? How is all of that going to happen? So that's absolutely a huge issue. And sometimes it's not even a question of having to do it. It's just wanting to do it and it making sense. And when you do work internationally the way that we do, it's literally done all day, every day. So we have our entire production kind of based here in the US, and we have a redundant version of it basically sitting in New Zealand, and those have to sync up all day, every day. So no, it's critically important, and it, as Brian has said, it's just one more element, that is a huge part of the industry. It's back in the day, I think there was maybe the perspective that if you weren't going to be Coppola or Hitchcock or Scorsese or whatever, if you weren't going to be that director and be in charge of everything, what else were you going to do? There were maybe 3 or 4 other things that you could try and focus on. Not the case anymore. And all of these pieces are integral to movies being made and the way that we're going to continue to experience them.
Geoff, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and answering all the questions and engaging with the community here. So want to wrap up the session by thanking everybody for joining us today. And again, Geoff, always such a great pleasure. Taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today is so sincerely appreciated. And I hope that everyone had a great experience and got some good perspective from you and was able to get something to be a help them move forward in their careers as well.
Hopefully it wasn't too boring. And thanks again to everybody for being here. Much appreciated.
I certainly enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Geoff.